Hello and welcome back to the Stamford Idealistic Crusade. This video will be my latest batch of Laserdisc finds and pickups for the months of May and June. As usual, I don't really find many things, and then all of a sudden I get one batch, and then some local finds turn up. So this particular video turned out to be much longer than I thought it was originally going to be, and some really great finds popped up. Some real complete surprises. Just as a particular taster, I found 3 DTS titles to add to the collection, including this lovely copy of the DTS version of the Jackie Chan film Mr. Nice Guy, which is exceptionally hard to find on the DTS pressing because it is a later disc anyway. So many titles like this await in the video to follow. So with that, let's go off to the laser table. So first up are a number of discs that come from a disc swap I did with another local fellow collector, Ron Hall. So these were a handful of titles that he knew I would either be interested in or messaged me about, and then I did a disc swap with him. So first up is one of the really awesome Republic Serials releases. This is in their Cliffhanger Serials collection. They started out doing a number of serial releases, starting with some of the big ones like Adventures of Captain Marvel, and then slowly but surely did more and more through the 90s and eventually made it into this actual specific video release series on Laserdisc. Unfortunately, these don't pop up all the time, so I'm very happy to take a look at this now that I'm getting more and more into classic serials. And you'll note that the actual the releases in this series have a matching jacket design, usually with a colored border like this, with the Cliffhanger Serials logo in the corner and everything else the same. And I do appreciate that they do keep the original 12-chapter serial advertising here. As you can see, this still has the original Tower Records sticker on it, which, of course, this means it's a perfectly sealed copy in the shrink, so I definitely will be keeping that Tower Records sticker on there. What's also great about these is Republic would give you a little bit of background about each particular serial, not just who made it, but also where it came in the timeline of Republic serials, and also sometimes where they would reuse elements from previous serials and Republic films as a means of cutting costs. And by this point in the 1950s, serials were really starting to wind down, and by the end of the decade, the Republic serial, as it was known, would no longer be in existence. But still, Republic is the best known studio for serials, and usually their serials are a cut above in terms of comparing it to other serials. Of course, other studios had great serials of their own, but Republic was really known for their adventure serials, whether they were westerns like this or fantasy characters or science fiction serials, so on and so forth. So again, the more I get into classic serials, the more I'm interested in checking out every one I can get my hands on. And unfortunately, a lot of them haven't gotten modern transfers. So some, the Laserdisc is still a great method of watching them. And of course, like most serial releases, it's essentially 2 discs, but each side has a number of chapters. So you are getting a extraordinarily long runtime for your money because you're getting all 12 chapters of the serial. So here it's spread across 4 sides on 2 discs, which means full CLV on all 4 sides. And like pretty much all the other Republic serial Laserdisc releases, you're also getting PCM mono, so you're getting digital sound. And some of the serials that did make it over to DVD, a lot of times what they do is they port the masters made for VHS or the handful they got released on Laserdisc, so you're also taking a hit in your audio, bumping down to a lossy codec. And then usually they would also shove a lot of the chapters onto 1 or 2 discs, sometimes all 12 chapters onto a single DVD disc. So sometimes it is nice to actually go back to the LD, and sometimes like here you get the better audio and you don't have to worry about all of the chapters being overcompressed. And then the other thing, and perhaps the nicest thing of all, is Republic for the most part was going to original negative materials or master materials. So these will be complete for every single chapter with the best surviving elements at the time. And since a lot of serials fell into the public domain, when you look at them on YouTube or various other copies, they may be re-edited or cut or have a different title put on them or different opening titles, or again be edited for runtime and content in some way, shape, or form. So generally it's best to find a source like this where they were, mastering from the most complete known source available. Next up is 1970's Torah, Torah, Torah on the Fox Special Widescreen Edition release. I've nearly gotten this before, and it's relatively common, but you usually don't find it in pretty good shape like this copy is. And of course, it has the slightly smaller Fox widescreen banner on the top, and then a pretty nice image from one of the many battle scenes of the film. And then it's also one of the Fox discs that they don't put the black border underneath the Fox information down here. As you can see, it is credited as stereo extended play with digital sound. The film did have a stereo mix, or at least a multi-channel mix of some type, as far as I'm aware of. So I'm very curious what the audio will sound like, because this film, for its time, is known as having a really interesting sound design and sound mix. It's not just simply a mono film. Now, the gatefold is really nice. It's very surprising for a Fox release of this era that still has the standard widescreen information jacket. It has a full-blown gatefold with full liner notes, but this was Fox's big prestige film and was made up of two units, essentially. The U.S. unit, headed by director Richard Fleischer, and the Japanese unit, which was originally supposed to be under the legendary Akira Kurosawa, but for various reasons that kind of fell apart, and so other directors wound up handling that. But the idea was to have at least both sides represented to a decent enough point by crews and directors of different nationalities. And this idea really does help give the film a broader scale, although it's been a long time since I've seen it, so it'll be interesting to revisit it on this Laserdisc presentation, which was, of course, also the first time you could see the film really properly letterboxed on home video. The rear is the standard Fox design, but it's a white background. As you can see, there's still a lot of text going on, and again, this was a big prestige, very expensive picture for Fox in 1970, so it's obvious a little bit more work and care went into the Laserdisc release. The film is spread over 3 sides, and there's no extra features, as is pretty common for Fox discs of this time period. But again, I'm very interested to check out the stereo mix. I would guess it maybe has some sort of matrixing applied to it, and like a lot of Fox discs, it doesn't say so on the jacket, so I'll have to fire this up, and I'm very interested to see what the picture transfer looks like. Now, this next one was a complete surprise and a very pleasing one. Of course, this is 1986's The Name of the Rose, the lovely and very difficult to find letterbox reissue from Image Entertainment. Of course, this is the 1986 medieval thriller of sorts starring Sean Connery that has unfortunately gone out of print. So the Blu-ray now goes for quite exorbitant prices. I was lucky enough to track down the DVD, which has a 5.1 mix on it like the Blu-ray, and a couple nice extras. That itself is pretty pricey now, and so is this Laserdisc edition. Usually you stumble across the earlier version, which is pan and scan. This version was done, I believe, in about 1994 or so, so it's one of these sort of 90s remastered widescreen reissues. And you can obviously tell the cover art is different, and it has the nice widescreen banner on the top. The cover's a little roughed up here and there, but again, this is now going for a nice chunk of change online or on eBay, simply because it's a harder to find LD. It's the letterbox version, and the film itself is out of print on all formats. I don't know why it is. I assume maybe it's a rights issue with the original rights holders or something, because it was released by Warner Brothers on DVD and Blu-ray, and then suddenly the Blu-ray and DVD went out of print, and I hadn't gotten the Blu-ray yet, so it was unfortunate, and I always wondered if I could ever find the Laserdisc. And talking about rights, you can see here on the rear jacket, you have Image, you have New Line, which is technically under Warner Brothers, and then you also have 20th Century Fox over here. So already there's a number of rights holders. So I guess that's probably why the film went into out of print status. The rear jacket art looks pretty nice. It's maybe a little plain at first glance, but I like the black and the red, and the still selections are quite nice. The film is spread over 3 sides. It does have the original Dolby Stereo mix on the PCM digital tracks, so that is matrix encoded. And I'm curious to see how it compares to the DVD 5.1, which again is probably an up mix, but most of the time I generally prefer having the original Dolby Stereo, and 9 times out of 10, it does actually sound better than a 5.1 upmix on DVD or later formats. Unfortunately, there's no extras or anything, but if you did manage to get the DVD or the Blu-ray, there are some extras on there. The film itself is quite underrated, so it's really a shame that it's fallen into out of print status, and I hope that can get resolved, and so it makes the film much more available for people to see again, particularly going through Sean Connery's filmography. But I'm very happy to finally be able to check out the LD. I'm really curious to see what the transfer looks like because, again, this one is pretty hard to come by, and it's getting very pricey now that the film is out of print. And then lastly of these discs from Ron is the anthology film Four Rooms, most famous for having the section directed by Quentin Tarantino, another by Robert Rodriguez, and of course it's split. It's 4 different directors and 4 different features, but featuring a lot of the same cast and, well, I guess Tim Roth is the bridging character, and it all takes place in the hotel. So in a lot of ways, it's actually very similar to earlier films of different eras that were anthology films and would take place in a certain time and location. But I haven't seen this in ages. And of course, anybody who's watched a video on this channel or knows me, I'm not a Quentin Tarantino fan, but yet I can't pass up something like this on LD, particularly this one. It's very uncommon and goes for, again, a nice chunk of change. I wasn't aware that it did. I knew that it wasn't very common, but apparently this now goes for a nice little bit. So I couldn't say no to to a copy at a swap meet. It's letterbox, and of course, being a Miramax title means this is a Disney disc in disguise. Hence their usage of their favorite stereo banner down there, or icon, I should say, or logo. And on the bottom, you have the traditional Disney layout. So again, pretty much any Disney title, whether it's Miramax or Touchstone, will have this same bottom information. It's film only with just a single CLV disc, 2-sided, Dolby Surround encoded Matrix audio on the PCM digital tracks. They're nice enough to tell you that it's actually matted off. It's framed at the original 1.8:1. So yeah, I haven't seen this since, I don't even know. I think I saw this back in the 90s in the whole Tarantino huge days, post Pulp Fiction, really, where it was pretty much inescapable. So I figured I would revisit it on this LD, check out the transfer, and yeah, I can't even remember a bunch of anything about this, so this will be going in completely blind. Next up are some discs from Vinny Onorati, the great Laserdisc Forever admin and member of the Laserdisc Wolfpack Podcast. So he usually has a batch of discs for sale on and off, and every once in a while, he's got some great titles that I can't resist. So this is one I've tried to get for a long time. It's one of those that usually goes for a nice amount simply because it's an iconic film of the 80s. People like the art, so they pay just for a good jacket, and it's always eluded me until now. So this is the standard Universal letterbox release of Conan the Barbarian, the original film produced by Dino De Laurentiis and directed by John Milius. For me, the best easily. I mean, it is the great film of the Conan films. Although to be fair, when I did see the sequel, Conan the Destroyer, and the spin-off film Red Sonja, their reputations are terrible, but I mean, I didn't think they were absolutely terrible. They just don't have the drive and the artistry and the intelligence behind them that this film, Conan the Barbarian, did. And it's such a shame that John Milius was never able to continue and do the planned Conan sequel. And there's been talk on and off through the years of Arnold coming back and doing a serious follow-up or final film. And that still would be interesting to see. But this film still remains excellent, and the Laserdisc is actually important in a number of ways. So you have beautiful original art, and very oddly for a Universal disc, they allow it to extend. So Conan's sword extends into the letterboxed and background area, which again never really happened on Universal discs. I think simply because the dimensions were so tall, they didn't want to cut where the light glints off the sword blade. So it makes the jacket look even more striking because it's like Conan is so strong, he literally punches through the dimensions of the studio jacket. So beautiful looking. Unfortunately, I mean, I wish it was the whole jacket, but I do like the style Universal did with their letterbox jackets, but it's just very hard to get this in decent shape for a good price. Usually it goes for quite a bit, and once you see it, it's already sold. Unfortunately, it is 2 discs shoved in a jacket. There is no gatefold, so there's little side creasing, and that's just bound to happen, particularly a disc that's, you know, had a life since the mid 90s. What is important about this, though, you see the digital sound marker. This film had a mix in mono. Apparently, it was deemed unimportant, or Dino De Laurentiis thought it wasn't a profitable idea to release the film in Dolby Stereo. So it was released in mono, whereas, for example, Flash Gordon was released in Dolby Stereo. So when they remixed the film into 5.1, it really did the mix a disservice, and they changed some of the audio. So if you look at a modern version, it's got a 5.1 remix, and pretty much all of them don't have the original mono on most Blu-rays. The DVD did, and unfortunately, the DVD also had the slightly extended cut, or believe it's called the director's cut, whereas this is the slightly shorter theatrical version. And the difference, of course, is just, it's a handful of minutes. It's not terribly much, but I do really like those added little bits. And so usually I just watch the DVD because it doesn't have the problems of the HD master, or the Blu-ray version, or the awful 5.1 remix. And it's got a pretty fun commentary with Milius and Arnold, just talking about the film and memories and such. But I've always wanted to see the LD, and I've always been curious about the picture transfer, which I've heard is pretty good. And of course, it has the original mono mix. But again, it is the theatrical version. So if you're used to the slightly longer version, you will have to keep that in mind on this. Now, it is movie only. It's a standard Universal letterbox release, so it's spread over 3 sides. It does include the theatrical trailer at the end, but again, I'm just been curious about this disc for ages, and I'm so happy to finally have the letterboxed version. It's one of those titles. It's like it's like Terminator, it's like RoboCop, it's like Commando or Predator. It's such a famous film, and it has Arnold, and so usually you have people who just buy it for the jacket, or they're willing to pay a bit more of a premium for it, even though it's just a standard disc. So it's kind of tricky and tough to get this for a decent price. So I'm very happy that I finally have a copy to check out on LD. Next up, we have the 1995 remastered reissue and, I guess, restoration at the time of the famous 1968 Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus concert. That, of course, was designed as a telefilm that featured many famous acts and was unfortunately shelved for an extraordinarily long time. And the rumors were that it was because the Stones felt they were completely upstaged by The Who came in and basically blew the roof off the place with a, simply saying, blistering performance that wouldn't even begin to describe it. But they played their iconic A Quick One While He's Away, the title rock opera, their first major recorded rock opera from their second album, A Quick One. So it's the iconic, nearly 10 minutes, multi-part song that tells a story over a course of time, and it's one of the Who's most iconic recorded live performances. And being a giant Who fan and being obsessed with the different masterings and releases of Who material, I was very curious to check out the LD presentation of this. Of course, this has been released on DVD. It's been remastered many times. It's come out on Blu-ray even. But I was very curious about this, and you get the wonderful art on an LD jacket, and this copy was still sealed. And of course, many other iconic faces will pop up on this. If you've never seen it and you're a fan of the Stones or the Who or John Lennon solo material, even if you're a fan of anything British Invasion or 60s music in general, if this sounds anything that might float your boat and you've never come across it, it's a must to watch at least once. But the music itself is so great you can return to it many times. But being a giant Who fan, that's why I wanted to check this out. There are 3 audio presentations on here, which is really interesting. So the analog left is mono, so So that's left mono. The analog right is taken out by a Dolby AC3 5.1 presentation, and then the digital tracks are stereo PCM. So you get all three options, which is nice. And they're all mixed differently. So again, I believe they did a restoration in stereo and then did a 5.1 mix from there, like most music releases. And I believe that's what all the later releases have. But again, particularly with The Who, every time something gets reissued or re-released, there's some change in the audio mix and it can be different. So I was just curious, and this popped up and Vinny had it for super cheap and it was still sealed and it's got the beautiful art, so I figured why not. And then one more cute thing, I opened this up and sure enough the label is customized with the Rock and Roll Circus there, so that was a nice touch. Next up are a big bunch of discs sent to me by the man himself, Sam Hatch from Culture Dog, and of course one of the chief members also of the Laserdisc Wolfpack Podcast. So he sent me a really fantastic box of discs, a big mix of stuff that he was looking to get rid of. And so first are a couple animation titles. This one is one of the Looney Tunes Merry Melodies related titles. This is the Daffy Duck's Quackbusters release from Warner Brothers. This was a feature film they put together in the late 80s, and it was one of the many times they decided to do something with the Looney Tunes characters. They would do the same thing with the Hanna-Barbera characters. Every once in a while, they would try and make a Scooby-Doo feature, for example. So this is primarily taking some classic materials from the various shorts and working them into brand new material and turning it into a 75, 80-minute feature. It is in the Silver Banner 80s style Warner Brothers home release jacket, but like all Looney Tunes, it's harder and harder to get the LD releases, even though we're all primarily focused on the Golden Age of Looney Tunes 5-volume box set, which I've done the 4 volumes I have in another video. But if I can ever spot the standalone releases, I try to get those where I can for cheap because, again, they are difficult to pick up. And I had forgotten. I thought this was another compilation of shorts, but it is actually a mixture of new and old material. So I believe I've seen this at some point, but it will be interesting to fire this up and look at it again. I have to try and get the sticker off. It's one of those peskier stickers I've got to try and work off. But everything else is standard Warner Brothers for the time, as you're well aware of. If you've looked at any Warner Brothers Laserdisc, you're used to the Silver Banner. But what's nice is they use the classic characters, and they've got them actually popping out of the box here, so it looks like they're actually hanging on the side of the jacket, which makes it look a bit nicer than the usual standard, Warner Brothers blank Silver Banner jacket. The film, of course, is very short, so it's just a 2-sided single disc. It doesn't say if there's digital audio, and of course, Warner Brothers was notorious for never saying what's on the disc. I'm not for certain. I think it may be analog only, but if it did have digital, I'm sure the mix is mono anyway, since it's a mixture of new and old animated material. But I'm not for certain. I don't think this has digital audio, but again, Warner Brothers never made it easy, so it is possible that it does. But being Looney Tunes, it is tougher to get a hold of simply because everybody likes to try and get Looney Tunes Laserdiscs. Next up is one of the standalone compilations of classic shorts. This is the 1994 release, the Roadrunner versus Wiley Coyote. So not exactly necessary if you have all the Golden Age volumes. I don't think there's any shorts that are on the standalone releases that aren't already included in those, but I could be wrong because I have the hardest time trying to keep track in my head of which shorts are where on which format. But anytime I can come across one of these, I'm very curious to check it out, compare it to the Golden Age boxes. And again, this is from 94. Really nice custom art on the jacket. You could frame it if you wanted to, and it's still sealed. So I couldn't believe he was looking to get rid of this. Really nice art that does match the rear jackets of some of the other standalone releases. So if you do come across any of these, they usually have a yellow background. It's a single CLV disc, PCM mono. It does have digital sound, and it's just classic shorts of the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. So it's a nice feature presentation of just their shorts in particular. And then last for the animated titles is a really nice piece from the initial run of classic theatrical shorts on disc that Disney was doing. So this is from the limited gold edition collection. So this is actually part of the second wave. So limited gold edition 2 cartoon classics. This is a volume devoted to Goofy shorts. So World According to Goofy. And all these would have these matching really nice looking gold jackets and with the central character and then the very 80s laser video disc in the corner, as Disney would do a lot. Unfortunately, these are all analog only, so they don't have digital sound, but I never thought about getting these because usually they do still have a nice premium to them because they're Disney and they look very nice and they're very collectible. But I'm very curious now to finally be able to check one of these out. So it's just a single CLV disc with a number of classic Goofy theatrical shorts and again, analog mono only. But yeah, I'm very curious to look at what the quality is like on the transfer because with Disney material, particularly the animated features, the earlier back you go in home video transfers, usually the more untouched it is and in picture and sound. So very curious to see what the gold line has to offer in terms of picture and sound quality. Not that I would actively seek out all the others, but I've just never had the opportunity to look at these one of these up close and actually spin the disc itself. So this should be an interesting playthrough, and I'm very curious to see what the picture quality is like. Now moving on to non-animated titles, this is the Bob Hope vehicle, the Lemon Drop Kid from 1951. It's a image release via RCA and Columbia, so it's a licensed title. It does have digital mono. I've never seen this film, and I'm trying to beef up more on Bob Hope titles that I haven't seen. So that, and also the fact that if there's any film from classic Hollywood or the classic eras that's on Laserdisc and has digital original audio, chances are I'm going to buy it because simply I try to see every classic Hollywood title I can, and if an LD has digital sound, then I want to spin it and check it out, and I'm a geek for digital soundtracks, what can I say? It's the standard image style, so it's very plain and obviously sized for VHS dimensions. But again, I'm trying to see more of the various Bob Hope films, and this was a no-brainer out of the box of discs that Sam was looking to get rid of. Next up is the underrated 1990 film Quick Change with Bill Murray, and it's a really, again, underrated, undervalued, dark, sardonic black comedy in so many ways. It did just recently get a new Blu-ray from Warner Archive, so of course that went on my wish list, and what did I do but get the Laserdisc as well. So the only problem with this release, the jacket art is quite nice, and Warner was using the full width of the jacket, so it looks nice even though it's got a lot of text and stuff. The only problem, it's not a letterbox release, so it is a 133 presentation. I'm pretty sure this is opened up. I know Sam hates the open mat term, but essentially I'm pretty sure this is opened up from the original framing. I don't think that this was scope, but I could be wrong. If I'm remembering correctly, I think this was like 185 spherical. It is a single CLV disc, the original Dolby Stereo mix on the digital PCM track, and standard Warner jacket for the time, but it looks pretty nice. It looks spiffier than your average 1990 Warner jacket. Only problem, it's not letterboxed. So if you're like me and you're a stickler for original aspect ratio, that will probably bug you a little bit. But again, it's probably opened up, so it's not like a full pan and scan job. I still really want to get the new Warner Archive Blu-ray, but again, this does not pop up very often on LD, and it just looked too good, so I went ahead and asked him to send it to me as well. And then last for the actual single film discs that Sam sent, this is the 1997 film Albino Alligator, which I've never seen, and it's a pretty late Laserdisc pressing because the disc came out in '98. Of course, because it was directed by Kevin Spacey and has a Kevin Spacey commentary track, probably not going to be the most desirable film that people are going to be interested in nowadays, which is, of course, understandable. But again, it's a late release, and it has AC3 and THX mastering and stuff, and I've never seen it, and it's supposed to be a pretty good crime thriller, and the cast itself is great. So I'm gonna look at it for those specs and go from there. But it's a pretty nice looking jacket. It's got a nice glossy finish to it. It's got a little bit of spine creasing, but nothing terrible. Again, it does have THX in terms of certification. It has their little stamp on it. And it does have Dolby Digital AC3 and has Dolby Surround PCM. But it also has a Kevin Spacey director's commentary as well, for whatever that's worth. So yeah, it's not quite a full-blown special edition, but back in the day, if they did put a commentary on, sometimes they would just go ahead and call it a special edition. It is Miramax, so that means it is a Disney disc in disguise, hence the typical Disney blurbage at the bottom, which should be recognizable to everybody by now. If you've seen my other videos, I have many, as I like to call them, Disney discs in disguise. It's a single CLV disc, 2 sides, no extra features outside of the audio commentary. So this will be a first-time watch for me, and I'll be curious to look at, always with late releases, check out the picture quality. And then lastly, Sam had some box sets. So he very graciously sent me 2 box sets. The first of which here is the Abbott and Costello Comedy Collection from Universal in the mid-90s. This is a really nice hinge top box connected via the spine. It is exactly the same in terms of design as they did on the boxes for the 1940s Mummy sequels and Invisible Man sequels. So they did those 2 box sets for the classic monsters, and unfortunately didn't do it for the others. So here they did it for 4 of the later Abbott and Costello films. Again, unfortunately, they didn't do it for some of the primary ones. You would think they would have done one, but they did one for, of course, the Abbott and Costello and horror monster mashup films. But they've done this one of some of the later films, and I really like the jacket design, or I should say the box design, and the stills they used, and the sort of old-timey silvery beige quality they gave to it. I don't know how much that'll come across on camera, but it's got a nice little sheen to it when you move it around in the light. Now, of course, the box is connected by a hinge, and then on the back you get the art and basic description of each of the 4, and each one uses the covers that would have been on the VHS releases. So inside are still the original inserts. So here is a nice mail-away card and advertisement for Universal titles at the time. The scary thing is now that I own a good number of these, I guess. And as always with the mail-away cards, it's always very interesting to think, what would happen if you filled it out and mailed it? Would it actually go somewhere and you actually get a response somehow? And then the other one is a blurb about the then new Abbott and Costello in Hollywood book. Oh, of course, it says you can get this at a discount if you mail this card in. Again, I wonder if that's still valid. It's a really nice thick cardstock, and again, this feels exactly like the booklet in the Mummy and Invisible Man LD boxes. But here you get a beautiful write-up, tons of liner notes. As you can see, literally the entire thing is liner notes. And then on the interior panels, you get the section for each film. Again, pretty much replicating what the back of the VHS sleeve would have given you. So this is pretty much essentially what we got, again, like the Mummy and Invisible Man boxes, but this one has a extensive essay. And then here is your chapter breakdown. Again, like the Mummy and Invisible Man boxes, they do include the trailers. The first 2 trailers are included after the second feature, and then the other 2 are included at the end of the 3rd and 4th feature. What is really interesting, though, unlike those sets that included stills galleries, here they apparently located surviving outtakes from the final 2 films. So after the trailers, there is a chapter for each film's outtakes, which just the thought of having outtakes of one of the great comedy teams from this era. Obviously, there's not a lot of that floating around, so the fact they were included here is a really nice touch, because even though it was a box set, Universal still wasn't doing, full-blown extras packages. I still really need to get the monster set someday. I really would like to, but every time I find it, it usually goes for a nice amount. Of course, with any box, you get the lovely, highly collectible foam insert, and then the discs themselves, which I believe are all CLV. So all in all, this is a really nice set that does not pop up very often, so I was very happy that Sam decided to send me this, and I'm really looking forward to revisiting these, because I've seen a number of the classic Abbott and Costello films, but I know I haven't seen every single one. So it'll be interesting to look at these on LD, and if they're anything like the Mummy and Invisible Man boxes in terms of their transfers, particularly the Mummy one had fantastic transfers, so pretty curious to see what the films look like on this box set presentation. I should, of course, also mention they all have their original mono soundtracks on digital PCM renderings. And then last from the disc that Sam sent is this beautiful copy of the Road to collection box set, also from Universal, also a nice hinge top box connected via the spine. So this brings together 4 of the classic Bob Hope and Bing Crosby road films, and in a beautiful box that, of course, the art is designed to look like an old-fashioned steamer trunk with stickers representing, old school travel stickers with the title of each film. Beautiful idea. It's a wonderful box design. It's one of the best, I think, on the format in terms of just the idea and the execution of it. Very simple, beautifully done. And again, the rear is the same, where you have what would be on the VHS art for each of the films being represented, the little blurbage about each, and then, of course, it is connected via the hinge, so it's got this sort of sticker on the side covering that up. The films are, of course, all presented CLV. It's a box set, so each film runs into the next, and all of them have their original mono tracks digitally encoded via PCM. So here is the insert. Nice essay and write-up there on the first panel. And the second panel has your chapter stops. Everything is spread over 6 sides, so it's 3 discs, just like the other set. And I guess they didn't have any trailers at this time in terms of surviving trailers, because there's nothing included here in terms of trailers or extras in that regard. And then you get the individual panels for each film, again with the reverse art that would have been on the back of the original VHS sleeve at the same time. And of course, here are the discs, all CLV. And you always have to have your collectible foam insert. So many thanks to Sam Hatch at Culture Dog for this wonderful bunch of discs, and just titles never expected to be sent, and then topped off by these 2 beautiful box sets. So on to the first of 3 DTS titles that I picked up. This one I've been after for a very long time. It is one of the few Disney animated DTS titles on Laserdisc. This is, of course, the DTS of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Disney's animated feature version of the film. And while it doesn't have the gorgeous packaging of the limited collector's CAV box set with all of its extras, and again, its full CAV transfer, this does have the DTS soundtrack presentation. So this is the same fate that Pocahontas and Toy Story find on Laserdisc. You have the standard pressing with the same art as the DTS version. Then you have the beautiful, essential, packed to the gills CAV box set, but all of those only have AC3 5.1 Dolby Digital. So for the DTS, you have to actually go to the separate standalone movie-only DTS presentation, and you do lose that nice full CAV presentation. So the picture quality will not quite equal what you get in the box set, but here you get the more potent DTS soundtrack presentation. Now with Hunchback, it's by the time where Disney was not, they wouldn't really go in and do much editing work later on and tweaking to their animated features around this time. But it is always possible, and they do always seemingly tweak the audio in terms of remixing, EQing, so on and so forth. So while this doesn't have the same fate as most of the earlier Disney classic animated features, it is still really interesting to look at these titles on their Laserdisc presentations, some of which do have their theatrical audio that I think is superior, such as the Lion King's Laserdisc, but of course that film has had a number of tweaks and changes. So I've always wanted to see the DTS presentations on LD for the couple Disney titles that got them. Again, you really want to go for the CAV collector's boxes as well. So you really would like both of them in terms of a full collector's standpoint to make sure that you get everything. It is the same mix as what's on the box set. But again, that box set, I've gone over it in my other videos. It is one of the most beautiful box sets in the history of the format. It's one of the best looking box sets of any video format. Those Disney box sets are real works of packaging art. So it's a shame we couldn't get that box and the DTS presentations united, but at least we did get a standalone DTS release. So this does have the same art as the standard release, and so usually causes a little bit of confusion. You will see this listed sometimes. You'll see the standard version listed as the DTS version, which of course it does not. It's differentiated here by the DTS banner on top, which they've made purple to fit. You do need to be careful on the standard pressing because it does have a pretty significant rot history. So if you do have that, there is a significant chance that it could at least have some laser rot. The DTS pressing does not have that issue. Most DTS discs were pressed at the Curare plant, or Curare, I never know how to pronounce that. And of course, they were the ones who were doing the Super NTSC encoding, so it is entirely possible that this is Super NTSC encoded. Again, it's not full CAV like the box set, so you do lose that. So the picture does take a hit, but it's still the same great transfer and still looks great. But here you get the much beefier, much more potent right off the bat DTS sound presentation. So of course it's the standard rear that you'll find on the standard AC3 non-box release, and the same thing you would find on the VHS tape, because as you can see here, clearly it's already dimensioned out for the clamshell VHS release. It's just a single CLV disc, two sides for the film. They did nicely give you good chapter headings and then also identify where the songs come in the film, so you can actually navigate to the songs if you want to just do that. But of course, all the extras are in the box set. So if you want the extras, you'll have to get the box set or look at the later DVD and Blu-ray reissues of the film. Interestingly, it is a Disney disc, so of course it has the usual blurbage here on the bottom. But as you can clearly notice, they left the indicators for Dolby Surround encoding, digital sound, and stereo, all of which would be perfectly fine on the standard release. But this is the DTS version, where the entire digital area is taken over by DTS, as indicated here. So I'm thinking this was left on to indicate, obviously, digital sound. But I'm thinking maybe the analog is just left as stereo with matrix encoding. So if you absolutely had to have audio and you didn't have DTS capability and you for some reason bought this back in the day, you would at least have something to fall back on, and they would add the matrix encoding to the analog tracks. But usually those could also be mono, but I just thought it was funny they left that on there. So I usually don't bother with the analog tracks. I just maybe spot check them every once in a while, but that would be my guess. This does still carry the THX seal, so it is a THX mastered title. But again, it's the same THX supervised master that is on the visually superior CAV box set. So this is giving you the movie only in CLV without the rot probability of the standard AC3 release, but with the much more potent DTS sound mix. I have had a chance to do a little bit of spot comparisons. It is the same mix, so it's not like it's a different mix between Dolby and DTS. But again, right off the bat, as with pretty much all DTS titles, you can tell this version has much more weight and heft to it. It's beefier and has more fine detailing, but of course you are comparing a massive difference in terms of the bit rate on disc, whereas Dolby Digital AC3 was 384 kilobits per second on Laserdisc. DTS is in the mid 1500s in terms of its kilobits per second, and that's what it would start out on DVD as before it was cut in half to the standard 755 kilobits per second rate. Now, of course, DTS titles command a nice premium and Disney discs command a nice premium, so combining the two means that it is very tough to get the Disney DTS titles at a decent price. So it took me a number of years trying to wait out a decently priced copy, and then lo and behold, this one popped up, and I was lucky enough to spot it before a bunch of other people did, and so it just chips away at one of the few Disney discs that I'm still, it was filled a collection gap hole. There's still a couple more titles and one or two more box sets that I'm after, but very happy to finally have this, and I'm going to spin through this and listen to the whole soundtrack finally when I get a chance. And again, the only real downside here is that we couldn't have had the DTS combined with the CAV presentation and the box set to have like the ultimate Laserdisc presentation, but again, really nice to finally have the DTS version. Next up are the other two DTS titles, which amazingly I found in one of the local shops that usually has a small Laserdisc bin and just mostly commons and so on and so forth. And lo and behold, all of a sudden there was a handful of new discs in there, and they had these two DTS titles still in the shrink wrap at dirt cheap prices, and I thought I was dreaming. So first is, of course, the DTS release of Jackie Chan's First Strike from 1997. This, of course, is the U.S. Miramax recut and redub of what was originally essentially Police Story 4. And unfortunately, as with most Jackie Chan films and most Hong Kong action classics in general, the versions available in the U.S., if they're still in print or readily available, are, of course, recut or edited, censored, and redubbed into English. So they are not technically the original release version or the version as intended. But of course, these are going to be what most people are going to be much more familiar with because they're the versions in print. So personally, I try and avoid these and always see the original version. So it took me a long while to finally see the original version of Police Story 4. And unfortunately, the version I saw it in, the uncut Police Story 4, the quality was not the greatest. But it's interesting to compare to those because the audio mixes don't have the intensive punch of the English language remixes. So here on A First Strike, they have a really punchy DTS track here on this version, which is, of course, nice and pricey on the DTS Laserdisc collector's market, as most DTS discs are, but seeing these are action films and they have Jackie Chan in them, there are multiple layers of different types of collectors who would be interested in these particular titles, which, of course, drives the price up further. So again, I was extremely shocked to find these for the usual dirt cheap common price of common discs just in the local shop. I really like the jacket art on the back. The front's a little generic, and that's what you'll see on the standard versions and the DVD. But I like the rear art. I like that they use some elements of the underwater scenes, which are extraordinarily impressive. But again, I just hate that this is the US cut and dub, because there are some really impressive set pieces that are not in the US version. And again, I'm a real stickler for I like to see films the way they were originally shot and presented and cut and edited. And but here with these, there was some participation from Jackie Chan later on. Rumble in the Bronx is really the film that started to launch him in the States firmly outside of the hardcore Hong Kong fans and action film fans who would go to art house theaters and watch Jackie Chan retrospectives or watch programs of Hong Kong films and see Police Story 3 before it was redone as Super Cop here, for example. So this fit in that same trend of sort of repackaging the Jackie Chan films. So it'll be interesting to look at it this way. And again, I've already demoed the DTS track, because if I get a DTS disc, I can't not immediately check out the soundtrack, at least just do some demo spots here and there. And it is really bombastic. So it's definitely far beyond the audio mix capabilities of the original Police Story 4, because this is a full-blown remix and an original style DTS before the days of near-field remixing and limiting and such. So it is a very bombastic presentation, but you do have to keep in mind it is still the Miramax recut and redubbed version of the film. So, because this was released under New Line, which means technically it's a Warner disc, this was pressed by Image, because by this point, Image was handling most of Warner's Laserdisc catalog. And so when it turned up on DVD, it eventually got turned up in a Warner Brothers snapper case, I believe. So the film is presented on a single CLV disc, two-sided, no extras. So the big draw here is the really nice and punchy, bombastic DTS soundtrack. So a real surprise to find this, and still has iconic scenes for Jackie fans, even though it is the U.S. cut of the film. I wish there was a great presentation of Police Story 4 out there on disc somewhere. There are a lot of really awesome fan recreations, but as far as I know, I don't think there's an official, restored version of Police Story 4 with proper subtitles and such. But a lot of Jackie Chan films have gotten great attention and restorations over the past few years on Blu-ray from various labels. So I'm thinking Police Story 4 probably isn't far behind, but it would be really cool if a restoration could, if they kept the U.S. cut as like an alternate, if they could keep the really awesome DTS track on here. So really awesome surprise find, and it'll be interesting to look at the U.S. version of this again. So next up is the third of the DTS titles. This was the second I found at the local shop. I'm thinking the original owner obviously was a Jackie Chan fan, because these were both sitting there along with the other, most of the other discs that were new were action films as well. So obviously they were an action fan, and also obviously a Jackie Chan fan. And thankfully for myself, invested in DTS decoding. So this is the release of Mr. Nice Guy from 1998. Again, this is a U.S. cut and dub version, so it has a really potent, nice, boomy DTS track, just like the release of First Strike. But this will be in contrast to the original release version, which will not have as impressive of a sound mix. For this film, there is actually, very thankfully, a new Warner Archive release that presents the original version on Blu-ray, as well as, I believe it also has the U.S. cut. I've been meaning to pick it up for ages. I think they came out with it, I think it came out about 2018, but it's one of the few Chan films that has a U.S. release that is, fully restored and presents the original version as well as the U.S. version. So Warner Archive is now seemingly, since they've done Drunken Master 2, they might start doing more titles. So I think maybe they might do Police Story 4. I guess they maybe have the U.S. rights to that. But of course, most of the restorations have been on British and European labels, particularly Eureka has done a number of them. The great newer label 88 Films has done the majority of them from brand new scans. All those have been really impressive. I've been wanting to import them, and of course Criterion picked up and finally did Police Story 1 and 2 here in the U.S. So it's sort of a mini Jackie Chan renaissance in terms of finally getting his films better respect on home video. So it's kind of fitting with that going on that I've stumbled across two of the US versions with these really fantastic DTS tracks. But again, the unfortunate part is it's still the US version. The art's a little generic, if I'm honest on this, but it does look really nice. I like the orange background. I actually like this jacket a little bit more than First Strike's front cover, because it at least catches the eye a little bit more. The other one has the nice blue, but it's got the sort of VHS dimensions, whereas this, it's a bit more seamless. And of course, you put the DTS banner on anything and I start drooling because it's gorgeous. The rear jacket's a little generic, but it's serviceable, and the black background looks nice. It's a single CLV disc again, two-sided, and the big draw here is, of course, DTS. Because this is New Line again, it's technically a Warner disc, so it's handled by Image. But again, Warner Archive has released this film on Blu-ray with its original cut intact, so that is finally available here in the States in a truly good presentation. So I really want to pick that up now so I can have it on hand to compare to this version. I have to admit that there's something on this that really catches my eye, and I find it hilarious. So if you look at the chapters, they do include the theatrical trailer at the end, so that's your one extra. But one of the chapter titles just it cracks me up, just the simplicity and the goofiness of it. So that is, of course, the first chapter of Side 2, Chapter 14, which is simply entitled Chan in the Van. And that just tickles my funny bone. I can't help it. It just cracks me up. I'm hoping that was somebody with a sense of humor and not just somebody not caring to the point that their chapter titles were that level of stupid. But it's goofily charming in that way. So again, I never really seen the standard version of this, but I would say that would be much more common than the DTS variant. Again, these two Jackie Chan films and their DTS versions usually command a nice little premium, simply because of the Jackie Chan connection and the fact that they're DTS, and the fact you have both of those, like the DTS Hunchback, kind of drives the price up a little bit. Never maybe quite as high as some of the absolute top draws, but in the past few years, DTS LD prices have really gotten crazy. So you'll see some pop up on eBay with, starting bid prices of well over $100. So I often wonder if people are really collecting these for the sound quality or the perceived sound quality increase over, say, a standard version, or if it's just simply they like the collectability factor of the limited number of DTS releases. So this is the last of the 3 DTS discs that I picked up, and I'm now approaching a decent number of the overall run of DTS LDs. I never expected that I would have this many because they are quite rare, and again, the prices have really shot up over the past few years. But every once in a while, I seem to just stumble across some in the wild, and every time I'm completely amazed. So this was a real shock and surprise. Now on to the standard non-DTS titles. The first is a title for my director's shelf. So this is the 1954 film It Should Happen to You with Judy Holliday, and I can't remember for sure. I know this was very early in Jack Lemmon's career, but I can't remember if it's his very first feature film or it's very early. It may be, but it was directed by George Cukor, based on the screenplay was written by Garson Kanin, and I've never actually seen it, so I've read about it, and it's always been on my watch list. So this is going to go with the rest of my George Cukor director's shelf. Super uncommon as an LD. It's got a pretty nice value on the Laserdisc database, but I was just literally looking through that same bin with the Jackie Chan titles, and this was in there, lo and behold. It's a standard image disc, so it's nothing fancy. It's on the usual image disc cover where you have the sort of fake Laserdisc in the background and the obvious VHS dimension jacket art in the center. Licensed from Columbia, so it's technically a Sony release, but done by Image. It does have the original mono as digital PCM, and again, the usual style of Image rear, basically taking the VHS sleeve and putting some black borders on the side. And as always, Image would do this no matter what in this era. If a title had digital sound, they would go ahead and use the CD video logo. So I will actually be seeing this film for the first time on this, and for the most part, Image black and white transfers from this era, they can be a little rough, but they're usually pretty solid, but not as good as they would get later on, and not quite as good as, say, one of the major studios doing a slightly spiffed up transfer on a black and white classic title. But they still hold their own, and they can still be very serviceable. Not to mention, unfortunately, for a lot of titles that have never gotten good reissues or reissued at all, this is really your best bet on home video. In terms of sometimes the Image Laserdisc is it's better than the VHS release, because sometimes for certain titles there are simply no DVDs available. Next up is the 1938 film Sweethearts from MGM. It's one of the better regarded Nelson Eddy Jeanette MacDonald musicals, and I know I've said a lot of times, many times, I've never been a musicals person, but it seems every time I find one on Laserdisc and I give it a shot and I get more into the history of musicals, the more I get at least swayed over by the technical aspects and the artistry of putting these together. And it is an enjoyable experience. So this is actually a relatively uncommon title on LD. I've never actually seen this before. I never saw it until even on the LDDB until I looked it up. The jacket art is really, really nice, I have to admit. This is one of the really nice MGM jackets from this time period. As you can tell from the digital sound indicator, it does have PCM mono, and then the rear is in their traditional style at this point in the early 90s, and I should say late 80s, early 90s. It's a single CLV disc, does include the original trailer at the end, so that's a nice touch. And yeah, that's it in terms of extras. So this will be another classic era musical that I actually dive into on Laserdisc. And again, this is quite an uncommon title that usually goes for a nice little chunk of change if you look on the Laserdisc database. So a really nice surprise find in nice shape with a really nice cover art design. As you can see, they're really starting to twist my arm with musicals on Laserdisc. This is the restored, THX approved Fox mid-90s, or I should say 1994, letterbox release of the classic musical South Pacific from Rodgers and Hammerstein. Really nice art. I've seen this a number of times, but of course later versions would eventually add a discrete rendering of the sound mix. This merely has a ProLogic encoded Dolby Surround track as PCM. It doesn't have AC3 5.1. Had this come out in, say, 96, 97, that was when Fox was adding AC3 to classic musical releases on LD. They were doing a number of restorations like this, and other studios were seemingly following suit. I think probably maybe this got spawned or spurned on by the restoration of My Fair Lady and the big elaborate Laserdisc box set, which also was Dolby Pro Logic only in the box set, and then finally got a movie-only reissue where they added AC3. So this is pretty much the best version of the film you can get on Laserdisc, but of course there have been successive restorations that will give you a much improved rendering of the original originating large format origins of the film. But it's still a nice attempt, and it's always cool to go back and see a studio's attempt to do the best they could with a particular format at the time. So it's nice art, of course, on VHS. You can tell it was already sized for a VHS jacket in terms of where the characters were laid out, but it's a nice looking jacket with the modernized 90s Fox widescreen banner that I like very much with the searchlights. Now, the actual gatefold is excellent with a full-on essay, nice colored background with some original stills and poster materials. And then we go into the chapter index. So the film is spread over 3 sides, and the only thing you really get in terms of extras is it has the original Fox Movie Tone News added as a final chapter at the end of side 3. So there's no trailer. The film is in its roadshow version, so it does have the overture and intermission and such, which I don't know if it was on previous releases, but a lot of roadshow large format films did suffer from cuts in later releases, both theatrically and then home video versions could be pulled or prepared from who knows what source. So getting it properly letterboxed on video and fully complete with overture and intermission and so on and so forth was especially a big deal at the time. The rear jacket looks really nice. Again, more nice liner notes, a really nice usage of art on the rear. This is Fox when they were really making much more impressive Laserdisc jackets. They were getting away from the traditional Fox gray cover design. But of course, this film is important in terms of it's not just large format Todd AO, as indicated here. The transfer is in the 2.21 to 1 ratio. But, of course, the film was originally released in a roadshow version that ran about 3 hours. This is the general release version as indicated here. Now, the long roadshow version was thought lost for a very long time and wasn't discovered on a print until, I believe, the mid 2000s, and was thankfully restored and presented on DVD and Blu ray. So, obviously, they didn't have it in the Laserdisc era, so they were very kindly indicating, at least somewhere, it was the general release version, which runs, I believe, about 157 minutes. So, it's missing about 15 to about roughly about 15 to 20 minutes of material from the roadshow version, although this does have the intermission and the overture and so on and so forth. So it has most of the stuff you think about from a roadshow version, but there were specific sequences that were removed for the release version. So that's what you're having presented here on Laserdisc in a nice, spiffed up THX certified presentation with Dolby Surrounding coded digital stereo on the PCM tracks. Of course, later superseded by later restorations of the full Roadshow version, but still a really nice, handsome Laserdisc. And when I find discs like this for less than $1, they're twisting my arm to take musicals. That's what they're doing. So we move on from a nice upper tier Laserdisc presentation to back a number of years and much, much lower on the scale. So this is 1978's Animal House, obviously, on the standard MCA Universal Home Video release from 1987. Has their traditional color bar on the top with the title, so you can identify it when you're flipping through discs in a box. Has original poster art, but obviously, again, sized for VHS dimensions. It does have digital sound, so thankfully this was at the point where Universal started adding PCM digital audio to their Laserdiscs after their many years of holding out. But they were very picky about which disc they did this to. If you've seen in my other videos, I have a number of Universal discs where sometimes you don't know, but other times, especially on the Encore editions and a lot of the classic monsters, they unfortunately never got digital sound issues, whereas other things did, and there seemed to be no rhyme or reason to what got digital sound and what did not. So Animal House did. Unfortunately, this is not a letterbox transfer, and it is older. Presumably, this is the same master that was used for the VHS version. So this does seem like it is maybe opened up a bit from the original actual camera aperture. Of course, most people would term this an open matte presentation. I don't really have a problem with that as a loose terminology, as others might, but that's essentially what you're getting here. It's not a panning and scanning as if it was from a scope film, but it's obviously not the ideal original letterbox framing. Again, the rear jacket is the standard Universal style. This is in pretty nice shape, and this disc, because it's Animal House, typically goes for a little bit more than what a Universal disc from this era would go for. There are no extra features. Again, it's an older disc, so the transfer isn't super great, but it's 133, so it is using the full bandwidth resolution area, if you will, of NTSC video. So it does look good enough for what it is for the era, and eventually this would get superseded by the Signature Collection versions and DVD and Blu-ray, and of course the film just was released by Universal on 4K UHD, so what did I do but buy the 1987 Laserdisc because I have problems. But I was very curious to check out the mono mix here. And again, usually when Universal did add digital soundtracks, they were in really great shape. So you don't see this all the time. Usually has a nice little premium on it, and the jacket's in nice shape, and it was surprisingly less than $1. So I picked it up, and of course I bought it the same week the 4K UHD came out because, again, I have problems. So we move from an earlier disc to a really nice condition sealed late release. This is 1979's The Great Santini. This is a 1998 pressing from Warner Brothers and a letterbox reissue. So this is one of a number of Warner titles that were released in letterbox widescreen finally on Laserdisc very late in the game, and were quickly recycled into an early snapper case DVD. So it's a very uncommon disc to find on Laserdisc because of this, and usually like most late releases, goes for a nice little chunk of change simply because of the rarity. So this was a very interesting disc to find out in the wild, still sealed for very cheap. Of course, it will be the same master as what's on the Snapper Case DVD, but because it's a late release LD compared to an early DVD, usually the LD holds its own and sometimes can be better simply because early in DVD they were still working out the quirks and bugs of the format. Also, you have the film's original audio here as PCM, whereas on the DVD it would be a lossy Dolby Digital codec. The rear jacket art looks pretty nice. The film's just a single CLV disc with no extras. It doesn't indicate what the sound mix is, but of course Warner never did that. I'm not for sure. It's been a long time since I've seen this. I can't remember for sure if it was just plain mono or was Dolby Stereo, because it's 79. It could have been Dolby Stereo, and then would have been upmixed to 5.1 on the DVDs. But I'll just have to spin it because, again, I can't remember if it's mono or Dolby Stereo. So yeah, just a really nice find of a late release, and because it's late, it's got the modernized Warner shield, and of course was pressed and handled by Image, who pretty much had taken over Laserdisc for most every studio by this point, but particularly Warner Brothers. Here's another disc that's actually pretty difficult to get at a decent price. This is the Sony Columbia widescreen edition of Stripes from 1981. This is also the theatrical cut of the film, which was kind of hard to find for a while because they switched to the extended version on most DVDs and Blu-rays. This, of course, also has the film's original audio mix on the digital PCM tracks. And the reason why I went ahead and picked this up, not only is it just in nice shape, but this is also a DADC Austria pressing, which means it has it's rot-free. I believe this did have some copies pressed at the DADC USA plant, which was notorious for producing Laserdisc with rot. So anytime you see the Sony Deluxe widescreen banner on the top of a Laserdisc, you know there is a significant chance that it could be rotted. So you then have to play the DADC game. You have to check the back for a manufactured in Austria sticker, but usually that was on the plastic shrink wrap and not on the disc jacket itself. So you have to actually slide the disc out in the store you're in and read the inner disc ring to look for that wonderful verbiage, manufactured in Austria or DADC Austria. When you see that, you know you have a rot-free pressing. Whereas with a DADC USA pressing, you put it in your player and you play the rot lottery. So there are no extras on here. It's just a single CLV disc. Again, it does have digital sound and is the theatrical cut, which is nice. So I've been curious to look at this on Laserdisc. It's just been trying to find a affordable copy that is a DADC Austria pressing, which is easier said than done. But it's a particular thrill when you manage to find one finally after checking a number of copies or not being able to find one at a decent price. And on top of that, it is a DADC Austria copy, so I couldn't say no to Stripes that way. Next up is 1991's Curly Sue from Warner Brothers. This, of course, is one of the lesser-regarded John Hughes films, and a film I've only seen like bits and pieces of. I've never actually seen it all the way through. So, again, I know it's not very highly regarded, but it's a John Hughes film I've never seen, and it was a quarter. And the jacket's in really nice shape, which for a Warner Brothers jacket, they usually get dinged up, especially after all this time. So finding one of these in this kind of shape, again, it was a quarter, so I can finally see this. Nice enough jacket. Again, it's nice to have it without a lot of creasing all over it. But other than that, it's a standard Warner's jacket. It is nice when they would do a different color other than silver. So here it's this sort of light purple or lilac background. Otherwise, it's the standard Warner's jacket, Dolby Surround on the PCM track, and the transfer is actually letterboxed. And thankfully, they have indicated it, which Warner didn't always do. So they indicated the letterboxing and the sound. So it's one jacket where you're not playing a guessing game trying to figure out, is this letterboxed? What sound does it have? So on and so forth. So again, this will be a film I get to discover on Laserdisc and see it for myself finally. I know it doesn't have the greatest reputation, but again, it was a minty Laserdisc for a quarter. What can I say? I have laser issues. So here is 1992's Boiling Point, a nice Warner Brothers release. This is a film I've never seen, but I've had on my watch list for a long while. I've heard some people really like it, some people didn't really think much of it. But the reason why is this was written and directed by James B. Harris. And if that name rings a bell, that is, of course, because he was Stanley Kubrick's original producing partner. And they parted ways before Dr. Strangelove, but you will see his name on, of course, The Killing and Pass of Glory and Lolita, just to name a few. He did make a handful of feature films after he and Kubrick parted ways, particularly the really great film The Bedford Incident, which outside of film nerd circles, no one has ever seen or heard of. But that is a fantastic film that he directed at the same time Kubrick was making Dr. Strangelove. And there are a number of interesting parallels because it's a really great Cold War thriller. So that's why I'm interested to see this. This is a nice Warner Brothers jacket. Got a little bit of wear, as most LDs will have by this time, but it's still got the nice matte sort of finish to it. Jacket rears obviously a little generic. Looks just like other Warner titles like The Fugitive around this time period. It's just a single CLV disc, two-sided, but it is letterboxed and does have the original Dolby Stereo audio on the digital PCM tracks. And of course, Warner's always cagey about this stuff, so the widescreen banner is hidden down here, and it's very tiny, as is the Dolby Stereo indicator. I don't know why they had to always make this stuff difficult, but at least it's printed on there. So this would be a first-time watch for me, and finally checking this off my watch list because I've wanted to see all the other features that James B. Harris was involved in. Again, I'm very curious to see this because he also wrote it as well. So I've heard some good things about it, and so I'm hoping it's as good as some people have said it is. Next up is 1992's The Distinguished Gentleman. This is a Disney disc, which is pretty obvious since it has the Disney-style side banner indicating letterboxing and their favorite stereo logo there. This, of course, is one of Eddie Murphy's more forgotten comedies, and when you really look at the plot synopsis, it seems like it's basically trying to be a remake of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, but maybe with a little bit of all the Kingsmen thrown in because of Murphy's character being a con man who gets essentially elected to Congress. I've never seen this film, and it was dirt cheap, and I try to see I've been trying to see more of Eddie Murphy's lesser-known vehicles and such. And the reason why I wanted to take a look at this, I am a giant Capra fan, and of course, am obsessed with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. But the reason why I wanted to check this out, it was directed by Jonathan Lynn, who directed the movie Clue, which of course I am obsessed with. And he did a number of comedies that have kind of been forgotten around this time period. He did the picture Greedy from 1994, which had a great Kirk Douglas performance in the middle of, and a nice ensemble cast. It was a bit uneven, but I liked the general idea of it. So again, when you find LDs like this for super cheap, it's nice to just buy one out of curiosity and take it for a spin. It's from Hollywood Pictures, so again, that means this is a Disney disc, which, of course, the layout of the disc would tell you right off the bat. It's letterboxed. It's got the original Dolby Stereo mix on the digital PCM track, and that's it. There are no extras. It's just a single CLV disc and a title I'm interested to spin up and actually see. I've heard about it, and the Mr. Smith sort of connection, but I've never actually seen it. Next up from 1994 is City Slickers 2, The Legend of Curly's Gold, a deluxe widescreen presentation from Sony Columbia. And this is a still sealed copy with some of its original price stickers on here. And of course, as I said before, you see a deluxe widescreen presentation on the top. You think Sony, you think DADC, run, it's a rotter. But luckily, I couldn't believe this. I do have the original film on the nice remastered letterbox presentation, but I never thought I would find the second film because it's, a DADC rotter usually. But as you can see, very handily, because this is still sealed, there's something that should jump out, and it's the beautiful little white manufactured in Austria sticker. So if you see that, you know you're safe and you can purchase without fear of rot. And because this is still sealed, it still has the sticker on the shrink wrap. Now, of course, this sequel doesn't have the reputation the original film does, but it's been a long time since I've seen either film, so I wanted to eventually find this, if I could, to go along with the first film on LD. So it's a lovely condition copy. It was dirt cheap, still sealed. It's CLV single disc, letterbox transfer, Dolby Stereo encoded digital PCM audio, and the usual nice little bit of Sony liner notes. Outside of that, that's all you're getting here. It's not a special edition. There are no extras, but I'm just very happy to actually find an Austrian pressed copy, because you don't see those all the time. For me personally, if I find an Austrian copy of a Sony title, chances are, if it's less than $1 or $2, I will just go ahead and get it, because I'll regret it if I don't. Simply because the chances of another one popping up in decent shape is very good. It's very rare. So I know spotting another one will take me an absurdly long time. Next up, from 1995, is the sequel, Father of the Bride Part 2, so another lesser regarded sequel to a 90s film. I do have the original remake with Steve Martin on LD, so I always wondered if I could find this one as well. It's a letterbox, and it does have AC3, so this is a cheap AC3 test disc if you can find it. I know some people are always looking for something to test out their demodulator capability and just want a cheap common disc with AC3. Well, here you go, and of course it's a romantic comedy. It's going to be dialogue heavy. Not really going to use the surrounds all that much, but at least it's there. And this is a Disney disc, so at least they were kind enough to actually give it AC3 encoding, which not everybody always did. Of course, this is not as strong as the original remake, but if you have one, you might as well have the second one as well. And this was finally a cheap copy to find to have along with the first film. And of course, neither one really stands up to the 1950 original starring Spencer Tracy, which is really a classic of the genre. But they have their own charms, and I enjoy Steve Martin when he does more dramatic style roles. And there is a certain degree of this. You could probably argue this is sort of stemming from the success of the Ron Howard film he was in, Parenthood, in the late 1980s. But it's a nice presentation. Again, it's a Disney disc in disguise. It does have AC3 in addition to a Dolby Surround on the digital tracks. And again, this is really just because I have the first film and always wondered if I could find the second film for cheap. And then to close this video out, we have one of my all-time favorite Laserdiscs, a LD that is still important to this day because of it containing the theatrical audio mix not to be found anywhere else on home video. This is, of course, 1996's Mission Impossible on the THX mastered widescreen Laserdisc from Paramount. I've gone over this a number of times. I talk about it all the time because I love the audio, and the transfer is really reference grade for LD and still holds up for the format. It's one of my top Laserdiscs of all time. It's one of my most spun, and I adore the film. It's really a masterpiece of its kind, I think, and I think it is still not as appreciated for its own merits as it should be. But, of course, I own the LD. I've gone over it before. I own the Japanese LD, and I've gone over that before. So, lo and behold, what do I do when I find a ultra cheap copy that is still in the original shrink wrap and is in absolutely mint perfect shape? I buy it because I have laser problems, and I already have multiple formats, and I have the UHD release, and I have the Blu-rays, and I have the Scandinavian Blu-ray, and I have the DVDs, and I have the Laserdisc. So, of course, I bought another one because it was 50 cents, and it's absolutely in perfect shape. As you can see, it's still in the shrink wrap. It was opened on the side, so thankfully the discs aren't warped due to the actual shrink wrap shrinking literally over time. But again, it's a absolutely perfect copy, and I love the gatefold and such, and my standard copies, of course, got a little bit of general wear. So this was simply because it was 50 cents and still in the shrink wrap, and I adore this movie and this Laserdisc presentation. again, I have to highlight the fact, if you love this film and you've never experienced it on LD, or you haven't got the rare chance to see it in a revival screening, which I have, and it was incredible on an original print, because it has the same very bass heavy, low end feel to the audio that is here only on the Laserdisc. If you compare this audio on the LD to any other version, and this is both the AC3 5.1 and the Dolby Surround 2.0 Matrix, it's on both tracks. You will notice, particularly in the big action sequences or the set pieces, there is a real oomph and increased vitality to the low end. You'll notice right off the bat on side one, if you watch the famous aquarium restaurant scene, you have the really intensive buildup of dialogue, and then the sound cuts out, and then when the explosion happens and the cascading water comes through as Ethan Hunt does the jump, and we get the nice slow motion shot. There's really impressive effects work that will come right through your subwoofer. This goes for all the action sequences as well, and it is a noticeable difference compared to all the other releases, and I really miss that on the others. So I think it's taken me a long while to figure this out, but I think it's because a lot of films in the 90s, during the sort of digital sound format wars between Dolby and DTS and SDDS, it seems a lot of Dolby Digital films had a heavier bass LFE to them. GoldenEye is the other notable example, where the Dolby version on Laserdisc and DVD, and presumably the 35mm release version in theaters, has a noticeable punch and a much heavier LFE presence, whereas the DTS version does not. And then eventually that was mixed out on later releases on the Dolby track. Well, Mission Impossible, that happened as soon as the DVD came out. So if you get the DVD of this, it's a port of the Laserdisc Master. It's very early, it's non-anamorphic, and carries a pan and scan version on the other side of the disc. But already the audio is missing that more intensive LFE bass to it. So it started there. It's not on any other version. So this is a very common LD. You can pick this up for $1 or $2 at most anywhere. I think it belongs in every Laserdisc collection, and for the picture is excellent. It's a great disc to test your system with and to calibrate your visuals further and make tweaks and adjustments. It's a phenomenal reference picture transfer, but the audio is where it counts most, because it is still unbeaten. Because this is the theatrical audio track, which I did confirm with that revival screening of a original release print a number of years ago, and it was really fantastic to finally see this film in a theater, which of course I was unable to see on its original release because I was a bit too young, but to see it in a theater from an original print, but with this same fantastic audio mix I loved on Laserdisc, but in a theater environment with all that really nice, intensive LFE bass and the subwoofer content, was really impressive, and also sort of vindicating, because I always felt this had to be the theatrical audio track experience, and I was able to prove that in person. So this is one of the Laserdiscs I swear by. And so I don't really mind owning 3 copies of it now. I'm probably not going to get the pan and scan version, which is more uncommon, and because the pan and scan of this film is terrible, because this film was shot in scope and is a Brian De Palma picture, so the entirety of the frame is important and used all over the place, so panning and scanning this film really makes it nonsensical, but that is the other version floating around, which presumably also has the theatrical AC3 as well. I know it does have AC3, but I don't know if I'd go that far of picking up the pan scan version. But of course, if I stumble across it for $1 or less, knowing me, I probably would buy that too. Because again, as I always say, I have laser problems. So thanks for checking out this video for the latest update to my Laserdisc collection. As always, just when you think things have dried up, both locally and online, all of a sudden you find 1 disc, 5 discs, 10 discs, 20 discs, and you're like, where the heck am I going to store all of these? But some amazing titles popped up, like this one in particular. Couldn't believe it was at the local store for the usual, $2.99 price. So I saw it and figured it would most likely have a high markup applied, but thank goodness it didn't. So it just goes to show you never know what LD finds are out there. So always double check your local store bin, or if you're driving by a store, just take a second to peek through, because it always amazes me what turns up, even in stores where I've checked the same little box 500 times and there's been no changes with the same couple discs kicking around. So also definitely check out sellers on the Laserdisc Forever Facebook group, which is of course really outside the LDDB, Laserdisc Central, and of course support the LDDB by purchases or donations, because that is entirely run off of donations. Without the LDDB, I don't know where us collectors would really be. But with that said, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe found some discs to either pull off your own shelf you haven't watched in a while, or discs to add to your own wish list, or look for your own collection. So with that, as always, keep physical media alive and keep your LD spinning.